Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News. It's always fun when I can find three stories that fit together. It's like getting a Connect 4 or a Yahtzee. It's just an extra level of fun for Morning Movie News. And today I have done just that. And I'm happy to say that the theme of the stories today is protecting a brand. And not just a franchise brand, which the first two stories are about, but also a personal brand, which is vital in Hollywood. Not just within the industry, because it allows the studios to know what to do with you and how to utilize you, what your strengths are, but also with audiences, because they know what to expect from you and what to get excited about. And so building a personal brand is just as important for talent, both in front of and behind the camera, as it is for these big franchises that, of course, are splashed across the front pages these days all the time. But talent is too. And so, of course, those are our three stories. But we're going to start off with X-Men. Now, I think all of us are feeling pretty good about X-Men these days. Fox seems to have righted the ship and are headed in the right direction finally. I mean, X-Men First Class, as I said in my coverage, was, turning it over, I guess. That's what was righting the ship. And then Days of Future Past was getting it back online. And now we're all very excited to move forward and get, I think, probably the first free of any problem X-Men movies in a while. Probably since, after X-Men Last Stand, I think we finally feel that we're in a fresh place. But alas, we have another speed bump, and something is looking like it might derail this franchise yet again. Now, you might have seen this rumor that came up yesterday that Fox does not want Bryan Singer to helm X-Men Apocalypse, and they are having discussions with him about staying on as a producer because they don't want to lose his name and I'm sure his input. He's been very instrumental in, he was a producer in X-Men First Class. He's been very instrumental in getting the X-Men franchise back where it needs to be, and he did it. But I think because of all the controversy with those allegations against him, they don't want him front and center. And, we discussed in Movie Math when the film didn't perform quite as expected domestically that maybe those allegations did have an effect. Of course, it's doing fantastically globally. X-Men Days of Future Past is now the most successful movie in the franchise. But domestically, its numbers are actually quite depressed. And it should have passed 100 million on its Memorial Day weekend. It got a little under 90, as you might recall. A little over 90, but still it was the lowest debut of the summer to date at that point of the big blockbusters. And X-Men The Last Stand, which came out a long time before that, was able to get over 100 million in its opening weekend without inflation without 3D. So you can see that Fox might be like, what went wrong here? Now, of course, there's the self-blame of you ruined your own franchise and it needed to be fixed. But then, of course, and this might be true, there's the whole problem of, was it Bryan Singer's, controversy? Did that make some people feel uncomfortable about going to the movie? And I'd be curious. A number of you said that you didn't want to see X-Men Days of Future Past because of those allegations against Bryan Singer. And I'm wondering, how many of you stuck to your guns and didn't go because of what happened? I think that'll be very telling to see below in the comments if people really did follow through with that initial discomfort. So what's happening? So yes, Bryan Singer is discussing this. Apparently they're heated discussions, very emotional. I think Bryan Singer probably feels this is obviously very unfair, particularly because he hasn't been found guilty of anything yet. Although this case really has disappeared behind the scenes to some degree, and we don't know what's happening. They could be discussing about a settlement, trying to work something out behind the scenes so it never goes to court. So that could, of course, that would be very embarrassing for all parties involved. And it would still give justice to the wronged party. So we don't really know what's happening there. But I have to say, the allegations, as we said when they first broke, and as I discussed, it's a very difficult subject matter, but they are extremely serious. And Fox must feel they have some validity to be handling it so seriously like this. So it's hard to comment on something that we don't totally know the whole picture, but I think it is very regrettable to see Bryan Singer have to leave again so quickly. I mean, of course, his departure is what started the whole downward turn for this franchise, and his return is what helped it come back with X-Men First Class as a producer, and then, of course, with Days of Future Past. And he's already done quite a bit of work to get X-Men Apocalypse ready and prepared. As you might recall, all those tweets about him, it's snowing in Egypt, and, pictures of him in the writing room with his team. So a lot of his work on X-Men Apocalypse might be done. So maybe this is best for the franchise. It is very, I don't envy anybody's situation. I don't envy the suits at Fox of what they want to do, and I don't envy Bryan Singer. But of course, at the center of this, I guess, is this person who feels they've been wronged. And if they have been wronged, that is indeed a very serious situation. So I'm curious to know, what would you do? And do you think X-Men Apocalypse and the franchise as a whole can survive the loss of Bryan Singer for a second time? Is it enough for him to stay on as a producer? And who would you like to see take over as a director? I mean, I think there are certainly some directors who might be a little bit more bold than Singer, but as I said in my review of the material for X-Men Days of Future Past, nobody seems to have quite the understanding of the X-Men franchise and those characters and how they can be really cinematic as Singer. I mean, look how well he handled Quicksilver. Everyone says in Nolan we trust, but I think with the X-Men, it might be in Singer we trust. And so the fact that his personal life would have such a strong effect on his career and his legacy in Hollywood and filmmaking is unfortunate. But we'll see. Eventually this will be resolved. And it's not unfortunate if he really did commit these acts. So that's the first story of the day. Fox is in a very difficult situation, and we might have suspected this was going to come, but it's a little sad to see it coming from every angle. Sad if he did it, sad if he didn't do it, just the whole situation is regrettable. And we'll see what happens with X-Men Apocalypse. It's still going to make its release date, you can bet, because X-Men Days of Future Past did make so much money worldwide. So that's the first story of the day, and Fox's difficult situation trying to protect a brand and remain as loyal as they can to the person who's helped them, and not only helped them, but instrumental in building that brand. So the second brand, of course, is Disney's Frozen. Huge brand, one of the biggest brands that Disney has. They've said that it's one of their biggest merchandising sellers, along with The Lion King, Winnie the Pooh, and Toy Story. So you can just imagine how much merchandise this thing is moving. And as we've discussed multiple times here on the show, Disney was really caught unawares of this success. They didn't know it was coming, and they really aren't in a position to capitalize on it. So they're doing the best they can. They have the ice show, it's mostly a whole Frozen ice show. Of course, that's a great fit, obviously, because it's an ice show, and Elsa is the Ice Queen, and that's coming out. But then, of course, there was the big news that a lot of people were excited about, and that's that Elsa is coming to Once Upon a Time, ABC's fairy tale show, where they borrow not just from fairy tales and Fables, the comic book from Vertigo, but their own animated classics. But they tend to have interesting twists on them. But it doesn't look like they're going to be doing much of a twist with their characters from Frozen. We got more details yesterday, that's why this is in the news. TV Line was able to find the casting announcements, the casting call announcements for who they want to cast. And basically, when they're looking to cast characters, they put out little blurbs to describe what the character is like. So agents and actors can be like, could I pull this off? And then you submit your headshot resume, etc. Although, of course, for these characters, I'm sure every actor is like, I can do it. It's like in Ghostbusters. Are you a god? Are you a character from Frozen? Yes. So they're very telling blurbs. So a number of us wondered and hoped that perhaps they would explore Elsa's villainous side more so in Once Upon a Time. They seemed to hint at that at the introduction of the character, that she was dangerous, and she seemed to freeze some stuff when she turned it from water into a human, which was a new power for Elsa, apparently. And so she seemed like she meant business. But from this blurb, she does not mean business. She's in the business of forgiveness and loving herself and loving Anna and having a good life and, coming to terms with who she is and how she's different. So while I think that certainly capitalizes on the movie, I don't know how much it really, I don't want this to be like I think none of us want it to be a really expensive character meet and greet on television, so you're not even really meeting them. This shouldn't be fan service. I think, I don't watch Once Upon a Time largely out of loyalty to Fables, but I've seen some of the ads recently for the show. I've watched some clips. I watched that clip when Elsa was introduced. I love the Wizard of Oz, the Wicked Witch of the West, the way the ad campaign was run with her as she walked behind her. She turned the road to the yellow brick road. I thought that was, just a regular highway into the yellow brick road behind her. That was like a trail she left. I thought that was really clever and a great visual aid. And then, of course, Maleficent has been on there, but a very different Maleficent. I wonder if they're going to tweak that. But then, of course, they brought Rapunzel on the show, and they used that opportunity to cast a black actress, which I thought was really nice, and it brought diversity to their show. And it was a different take on Rapunzel, and it allowed them, to have diversity with their princesses on Once Upon a Time. Where's Tiana? She should be on there. I actually watched The Princess and the Frog again the other day, and I really enjoyed it. I think it really holds up, and it's a really nice piece of filmmaking. So, but they're not doing that with Frozen. So not only is Elsa totally regular, but we've also found out, based on what she is from, she's basically stepping right out of the screen, which you can understand why Disney would do that. But also they're bringing over Anna, who will be just like she is just like she was in the movie, voiced by Kristen Bell. But apparently Kristen Bell will not play her. When the news first broke about Elsa as the Snow Queen coming to Once Upon a Time, I said, well, is Anna going to come, and why shouldn't Kristen Bell play her? She kind of looks like the character they animated, and Kristen Bell, of course, has a very long history on television. So I think that would have been a nice nod to have her there. But apparently the casting call is out, and it will be somebody else. But then also there was Kristoff. He will also be coming to Storybrooke. I believe that's the name, right? Correct? and he's going to be just like himself, mostly reindeer friends. His only friend is his fellow reindeer. But there was one little thing about his blurb that I was just kind of made me roll my eyes, and they seemed like Once Upon a Time is highlighting what I disliked most about Frozen. And they said for Kristoff, they said, well, Kristoff is just having a hard time adjusting to sleeping indoors for the first time. And I'm like, really? You would die if you only slept outside, especially in Norway or a Norway-esque area. So I don't understand, why you would create some kind of a weird character who is like, wow, I only sleep outside. I mean, for heaven's sake, when we meet him in Frozen, he's sleeping in a barn. That's indoors. But I guess when they mean inside, like full walls, But there was a fireplace, I believe, in that barn as well, right? So I don't know. The whole situation, it reminds me of what a lot of people are saying about Augustus Waters in The Fault in Our Stars, and how he is the male version of the manic pixie character that women have been playing for so long. That cute, manic, adorable girlfriend character that, Zooey Deschanel plays on New Girl, and Zoe Kazan has played a little bit. Zoe Kazan had a kind of a commentary on that type of character in Ruby Sparks, a pretty solid movie if you're looking for something to watch. It's an indie film that Zoe Kazan wrote. She, of course, is related to Elia Kazan. And it co-stars her, I think they're still dating, her boyfriend Paul Dano. Good film. But it addresses this manic pixie trend of female characters. But now it looks like it's jumped over to men in movies or in entertainment aimed at women. So I think turning Kristoff into this kind of manic pixie is a very interesting choice, because he wasn't that way in the movie. I felt Jonathan Groff did a very nice job with his voice work, and he has kind of a grounded quality to his voice. So even though Sven had some ridiculous things to overcome as a character, such as only having a reindeer for a friend and being raised by trolls, and really no character development, I think Jonathan Groff did a nice job with his voice work of still making the character seem somewhat real. But this, I don't know. But you know what? I'm not a big Frozen fan. I'm not the audience they need to hit. So I'm curious to how you guys feel. Is this loyal to the brand, or do you think this is brand exploitation? All right, so that's the second story of the day. The third story of the day, I promised you a personal brand, and that is Nicholas Winding Refn. He had a very strong brand that he established right away thanks to his partnership with Ryan Gosling with Drive. Very well-received film by most people. It didn't do particularly well at the box office, but it got a lot of people's attention, although you might recall that one woman sued because she said the trailer was misleading. She was expecting a Fast and Furious type movie and instead got an indie film. I wonder whatever happened in that case. So anyway, Nicholas Winding Refn was doing pretty well with that film, but then he made Only God Forgives. The thing basically went straight to pay-per-view, cable and on demand, which was unfortunate for both Ryan Gosling and Nicholas Winding Refn. I think they did a lot to sideline both of their careers. And then while Ryan Gosling is stepping behind the camera to try, I don't think Ryan Gosling is too concerned with, his persona and his personal brand, which I think is a mistake and why he's floundering a little bit. But Nicholas Winding Refn clearly is, and that's because he took heart the fact that a lot of people were saying his films were misogynistic, and he was so disturbed by that and didn't want that to be his personal brand, that he reached out to the screenwriting community, to someone he knew, and he said, you know what, let's make a horror film that goes in the opposite of that focuses on women. So the result is a movie apparently called, I Walk with the Dead. And it is an all-female horror film, kind of like what Sucker Punch was supposed to be, but hopefully not offensive to women. It's very odd to have an entirely female cast in a film that women really cannot watch. Although some people defend Sucker Punch, but I've just not been able to bring myself to watch it because it just looks offensive from the trailers. But anyway, Nicholas Winding Refn says, no, that is not the case. This is going to take women in this movie seriously. And Carey Mulligan might star. She's been attached to it, but people don't know how firm that commitment is. But this, Nicholas Winding Refn, over the weekend, I believe over Twitter, confirmed that he definitely is making this movie as his next film. So I think the idea of Nicholas Winding Refn with a horror film is quite good. I thought he's very good stylistically, and he is very visually rich as a director. For instance, of course, we discussed that Scott Derrickson got the Doctor Strange gig, and so when I saw the trailer the other day for Deliver Us from Evil, I looked at it with new eyes, because I was like, okay, let's see what you've got, Derrickson. Let's see what got you the Doctor Strange gig. And I have to say, I couldn't see it. It still seemed not very inspired in any way. I mean, it was competently handled, I guess, and he was able to deliver a film, and maybe that's all Marvel's concerned about, but I didn't see any unique camera work or production design, no real unique choices, I guess. And Nicholas Winding Refn definitely makes choices, whether you agree with them or not. So I wish that perhaps, people are saying that Marvel wants cheap directors, cheap talent. I can't imagine Nicholas Winding Refn costs that much money. Go get him and say, do you want to make a Doctor Strange movie? I think he'd be quite good at it, and it would be very interesting. Although maybe it wouldn't be commercially viable, which might be the problem. Because Scott Derrickson, while he doesn't make strong choices creatively, he does bring in the box office haul, and so perhaps that was what it boiled down to in the Marvel Studios conference room when they were making this decision. So can an all-female horror film work out? I think it's an interesting choice, and I also think it's really fitting because female characters are often the lead in horror films, or they start horror films off. They're as often victims, but they're very strongly rooted in this franchise. Of course, Jamie Lee Curtis got her career started with Halloween. Neve Campbell is quite iconic in the Scream franchise. Drew Barrymore's cameo at the beginning of Scream is legendary. And of course, there's Janet Leigh in Psycho. So I think that's something where women aren't just the victims, although that's something that's progressed. Sigourney Weaver and Alien, even in Alien, those has a lot of the tropes of a horror genre, a horror film. But those women, even Neve Campbell, were very empowered and fought off this character. But an all-female horror movie could, I think, be very interesting, and certainly has the artistic side to it that I think Nicholas Winding Refn would need in any project he approached. But let's see if he can turn his reputation around, his personal brand, not just in terms of misogyny, but also maybe being a little more commercially viable at the box office, so that he is up for these Marvel and DC gigs. I think no matter what a director says, this is a great place to be working right now. And for the most part, Edgar Wright might argue otherwise. These studios are, giving exciting opportunities to their talent behind the camera that they're bringing on board. Although Nicholas Winding Refn, maybe you can always get one of those Star Wars spin-offs. They seem to be going on a hiring spree. All right, so those are the 3 stories of the day. I'm very curious to see what you think about all those brands and if they're being handled well. Now let's move on to the viewer question, which to some degree also loops in as well. I tried to go for a 4-peat. Let's see if I succeeded. So Stryden wanted to expand on yesterday's viewer question about whitewashing and Edge of Tomorrow, aka All You Need Is Kill. So he says, he or she, I'm assuming, Stryden did not sign their question. So Stryden says, Grace, adding on to the viewer question, I find it disrespectful that the movie did not credit the author for All You Need Is Kill, which I looked up, and it's Hiroshi Sakurazaka, who's actually, I believe, quite a successful author these days in Japan, based off of the success of All You Need Is Kill. But Stryden says, in The Edge of Tomorrow, when they promoted that movie, why didn't they promote the author? Hollywood promotes other books to film, like The Giver, Twilight, and many others. And I think what Stryden is saying is that, for instance, John Green got a lot of publicity for The Fault in Our Stars, and so did Stephanie Meyer. Suzanne Collins with The Hunger Games, not so much. But also Stryden says, come on, I didn't know Twilight was based on a book until the ads told me, and the author was female. Grace, do you feel the same? Well, I think, Stryden, the difference here is culture. Where the book originates from. And I think that there's just simply, as popular as Hiroshi Sakurazaka might be in Japan, that is not the case here in the United States. There's no name recognition to build on. Hollywood doesn't do anything if it's not going to eventually help the bottom line, or directly help the bottom line. That Hollywood has tunnel vision, how to make money. And so when they bring in someone like John Green or Stephanie Meyer, although Stephanie Meyer, I believe, was a producer on those Twilight films, so they had to keep her involved. And then she was much more involved in the host because I think she was much more involved in the making of that film. But John Green was brought in for promotional purposes because he has such a strong following on YouTube. But that's why authors are brought in when they're brought in. And also because they do have name recognition. Stryden, you might not be aware who Stephanie Meyer was, but of course the tons of people, and mostly young women who read her, so I'm guessing you might not be a young woman, who read her books knew who she was. So that, they really wanted to bring that fan base in. And also there's such a love of the source material by referencing the author and having the author come out and say this movie's great. It assuages any concern from the fan that maybe it's deviated from the source material to the point where you might not be interested in anymore. Now that's another problem with Edge of Tomorrow. It is not All You Need Is Kill. Tons of changes were made to that, to the point where they, as we all discussed yesterday, whitewashed the lead role. So it's hard to bring the author out there, trot them out on the press tour to say, hey, Hiroshi Sakurazaka, do you not love how we changed everything about your original novel? I think it would be hard for him to be, authentic, which I think authenticity is a big thing today with audiences and just in entertainment in general. How could Hiroshi stand there and say, oh yes, I love it, it's much better than what I wrote. Thank you, Hollywood, for showing me what I should have originally done. So I don't know if they'll utilize him in the campaign for the film in Japan, but I think that that's your issue that you're dealing with there. Not enough recognition for Hiroshi Sakurazaka outside of Japan, and such a strong deviation from the source material. I wonder if back in the day Margaret Mitchell would have gone on the book tour for Gone with the Wind. It just makes me curious. And maybe she did. I think, but I think today books are much more of a phenomenon than they ever once were. And, you see books be popular very quickly. It's not like a classic, adapting a classic. Although I think at the time Gone with the Wind came out, that was a relatively new book. But also there's Daphne du Maurier with Rebecca. I don't believe she was really referenced that much, but I know the name because it is referenced somewhat in the material. So while the author herself wasn't brought out, so again, I guess that's what you're seeing here. You're seeing a trend. When Rebecca came out, they're saying from the Daphne du Maurier novel, just like when The Fault in Our Stars come out, they say from the John Green novel. So it's all about name recognition and whether or not they did stay close to the source material. So it's unfortunate, strident, that Hiroshi isn't getting, his profile raised by this movie, but maybe on the next one. And again, it just didn't work out that way. All right, so that's today's morning movie news. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And please write down below what you think of today's top 3 stories, the viewer question, anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow, and any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.